Ted looks so handsome in his uniform, said Donna Linder to her longtime friend Carol Bruce. Yes, he does, Carol replied, looking at her husband with tenderness and pride. Carol stood a few feet away from her husband and looked around the large room. People were gathered in groups and chatting animatedly. Some were socializing with old friends. Others were meeting for the first time. Carol expected a lot of people to gather today, and the room was filling up quickly. Carol had seen pictures of her husband in his military uniform, but they were taken when he was younger, before they met and married. Today was the first time she had seen Ted in uniform, and she couldn't get over how handsome and energetic he looked. "What kind of uniform is he wearing?" Donna asked. "It's unfamiliar to me. And those medals—" "It's a Ukrainian army dress uniform," Carol said of the green dress uniform with a white shirt and black tie. "He's wearing two bigger medals, the ones with the blue and yellow ribbons. That's the title of Hero of Ukraine and the Order of the Gold Star. These are Ukraine's highest honors for bravery. President Zelensky personally signed the award certificate." Carol waved her hand toward an easel that showed two framed certificates of award medals that adorned her husband's chest. Carol looked at it again with pride. "He's also wearing American honors. He was awarded the Silver Star and 2 Purple Hearts in Afghanistan, but that was before we met." "I had no idea he volunteered to fight in Ukraine," Donna said. "What the hell would make a man his age volunteer to go fight in another country, especially in a country thousands of miles from his home? He's not even Ukrainian. He's from Beaumont, for crying out loud. Couldn't you talk him out of it?" "I tried," Carol said. "I tried to talk him out of going. I begged and pleaded and argued with him, but he'd already made up his mind. There was nothing I could say or do to change it." Carol remembered the day she had come home from work and found her husband at home, a saucer and a cup of coffee in front of him, the dark walnut dining table glistening in the light of the pendant lamp. He sat in silence. "Hello, darling. What are you doing home? I thought you'd be back in town late tonight. Is everything okay?" Ted had to drive an hour to take a reading in downtown Dallas, and he told his wife he'd be home late. It was 8 o'clock in the evening, almost 3 hours later than the time Carol usually came home. If she had known Ted would be home, she would have canceled her plans and come home right after work. "There's something we need to talk about. Pour yourself a glass of wine or coffee and have a seat." Carol was slightly alarmed by her husband's abrupt tone. "I'll take a quick shower and change into something more comfortable," she said. "No!" Ted shouted at her, shocking Carol even more. "Sit down. This is important, and I'm not going to wait for you to get cleaned up." Carol felt herself turning pale. She nervously pulled her usual chair over to the table across from her husband and sat down, placing her cell phone on the table in front of her. Carol lowered her gaze to her folded hands in front of her and felt the heat from her body leave blurry patches of condensation on the dark, glossy wood. Out of the blue, Carol remembered the day she and Ted had bought the dining room set. The furniture was Amish-made, well-constructed, and very expensive. Being able to afford expensive furniture was a new experience for them after years of setting up their home in department stores or IKEA. "In about 4 hours," Ted began, glancing at his watch, "I'll be on a flight to Warsaw, Poland. From there, I'll take a train or bus to Kiev, Ukraine. I signed a 12-month contract to fight in the Ukrainian army. I have withdrawn 25% from my savings account, but I won't touch my current account. I gave Sam Albright my power of attorney. Here's his card," Ted said, holding it out to Carol. Carol felt dizzy, as if she were about to faint. I don't understand," she finally managed to squeeze out. "Is this a joke? You're 45 years old. You can't go off to fight in some war." "I can, and I'm ready. I may have gotten my combat experience 22 years ago, but some things are not forgotten." "What about the kids? Have you told them? Are you going to leave the kids?" "Trey is married with a son of his own, and Lisa is engaged to a good man. My kids are going to be fine." Carol stared at her husband in shock. He referred to Trey and Lisa as his children, taking Carol outside the family bracket. She had come into their lives 15 years ago when Trey was 6 and Lisa was 4. Ted had divorced his first wife when he caught her having an affair with his boss. She hadn't contested the divorce. She was happy Ted found out about their affair because it gave her a chance to start her life over without the burden of a husband or children. She didn't ask for custody or visitation and agreed to give up her parental rights in exchange for not having to pay child support. The children had been in therapy for 2 years because their mother had abandoned them when Carol came along. She couldn't have loved Trey and Lisa more, even if she had given birth to them herself. Ted's harsh reminder that Trey and Liza were his children, not hers, was a kick in the butt for Carol. "How can you say such horrible things?" Carol cried. She felt tears come to her eyes. She was their mother, for crying out loud. "I met with them last week to let them know what's going on. They're not thrilled about it, but they understand. They'll be fine." "Last week?" Carol asked, surprised. "They didn't say anything to me? I thought we were much closer, especially Lisa." When Ted and Carol got married, Lisa snuggled up to Carol. She desperately needed a mother's love, and Carol was beyond thrilled to be able to give it to her. She hadn't had the opportunity to have children of her own, and becoming a mother to Lisa was one of the greatest gifts Carol had ever received. Tears streamed down Carol's cheeks as she realized that she may have recently become estranged from the 2 wonderful young people she had helped raise. "Just like that? You're going to leave me for a year and I'm supposed to just accept it? Deal with my husband leaving me for a year?" Carol was furious. "I'm sure Ray Hanna will be there to comfort you," Ted said, a hint of anger in his voice. Carol looked at Ted. She felt her mouth open in startled bewilderment as she began to realize that her husband knew about her relationship with her boss. Ted, for his part, looked at his wife in disgust. He thought she looked like a flounder thrown ashore by a fishing boat, her mouth opening and closing, groping for air with her mouth and trying to find an answer. Denial or confession, a lie or the truth. What to do? What to say? "What do you know?" The fear and trembling in her voice were obvious even to herself. "We're not going to discuss this," Ted said flatly. "Sam has my power of attorney to act for me while I'm gone. There's no mortgage on the house, so with the money you have in your checking and savings account and what you make from your job, you should be fine financially." "Please, Ted, can we talk about this?" "What I had with Ray meant nothing. It was nothing!" Tears ran down Carol's cheeks as she realized her husband was serious about leaving. "I've been watching you for a month now with the help of private investigators, so I know pretty much everything about your affair. 2 hours ago, Ray Hanna's wife was handed a package containing all the evidence of your affair. Who knows? Maybe you'll live happily ever after with him." "No, that's not what I want. I want you to stay here so we can save our marriage. I never meant to hurt you. I love you, only you." Ted shook his head and rolled his eyes in response to his wife's comments. "What did you think was going to happen when I found out you were cheating on me? How can you say you never meant to hurt me when you committed acts that you knew would destroy our marriage?" "Come on, Carol, you're a smart woman. How do you think this was supposed to play out, knowing what my ex-wife put me and the kids through?" "You were never supposed to know," Carol sobbed. "It was something I selfishly did for myself, and I didn't think it would affect our marriage. Haven't I always been there for you? I've never denied you anything." "There were 3 in our bed. How many times did you think about him while having sex with me?" Carol flared up at this question and looked away from her husband. The forbidden aspect of her affair had always been admirable. The fact that her hot young boss lusted after her while her handsome, personable husband was madly in love with her had kept her libido going for months. She had become insatiable in her desire for both men. Carol wrapped her arms around herself and rocked back and forth, shaking her head as Ted spoke to her. This was never supposed to happen. Ted was never supposed to find out. She would put it out of her mind and everything would go back to normal. "Ted was never supposed to find out about this," she croaked out silently, rocking back and forth. This soon turned to horrible sobs as she began to wail that she didn't want a divorce. "Please, honey, don't do this. I love you. Please don't ruin our marriage over one stupid mistake." Ted shook his head. "One mistake? How many times did you and him have sex? How many times have you lied to me to keep me from finding out about your affair? How many times have you lied to me to spend time with him? One mistake?" I don't think so. Count how many times you had sex with him, kissed him, or lied to me, and tell me if you get one mistake in your calculations. Anyway, Ted sighed, I'm done talking about this. You know what you have to do. If you have any questions, call Sam. My kids know we're going to have this conversation today, so don't expect much sympathy if you turn to them, especially Lisa. She loved you and idolized you, and she is absolutely destroyed by your affair. I really hope Ray Hannah was worth it. Carol screamed, No! No, he wasn't worth it! Please don't do this! Please! As if on cue, Ray Hannah's phone rang on Carol's cell phone screen. She stared at the device with her mouth open in horror, as if it were a snake ready to lunge. Carol jabbed her finger at her phone several times to reject the call, finally grabbing it and hurling it across the room, smashing it against the wall. I guess the wife just ruined your boss's life, Ted remarked dryly. Or maybe he called to see if you wanted to meet. Either way, it's none of my business anymore. Carol rose from her chair and staggered forward, her legs seeming to stumble as she fell to her knees in front of her husband, arms folded pleadingly and sobbing. Please, can't we talk about this? You don't have to do this. I'll quit my job. I'll do whatever it takes to save our marriage. Ted shook his head. All you had to do to save your marriage was keep your vows. He stood up and carried his already empty coffee cup to the sink to rinse it before putting it in the dishwasher. I need some alone time with myself. I need some distance from this whole disgusting mess you've turned our lives into. I'll be gone for a year, and you can decide what you want to do. Divorce me to be with Ray or just sleep with him. His wife said she was going to divorce him, but who knows? They have young kids, so she might decide to forgive him and keep the marriage together. This may have been the first time he cheated, so she may change her mind about divorce. A year apart will give you time to figure out what or who you want in life. I choose you, Carol exclaimed. I'll choose you forever. I'll quit my job. I promise I'll never see him again. Please stay. Ted shook his head again. I promise you this. When I come back in a year, we'll sit down and talk about where we are and what we're going to do next. Sam will refrain from filing divorce papers for now. That's the best I can do. I promise I'll be back in a year and we'll talk about us then. Please, Carol sobbed as she continued to kneel and reached out a trembling hand to her husband, who remained motionless before pulling away from her touch. He then turned and walked quickly out the door so his wife wouldn't see the tears in his eyes. Carol was suddenly brought back to the present, noticing that most of the audience in the auditorium had already taken their seats. Carol quickly made her way to her seat and looked across the aisle and saw her stepdaughter Lisa sitting between her fiancé and Trey's wife. Lisa wasn't looking at Carol, but instead was staring straight ahead, never taking her eyes off her father. The anger her stepsons felt towards her was physically painful. The distance between them had become an insurmountable chasm. Lisa was more than a daughter. She was a best friend. And now she wouldn't even look at Carol. The audience fell silent as Trey stepped up to the podium. He pulled a piece of paper from his breast pocket and coughed before he spoke. We are gathered here today to honor the memory of my father, Theodore Bruce II, Trey began, but he was interrupted by some noise. He broke away from his notes when he heard the low, piercing moan of a wounded animal in unimaginable pain. It was his stepmother's cry as she stood up and stumbled forward, falling to her knees before her husband, hands folded as if in prayer. "You promised," she wailed. "You promised you would come back and talk to me. You promised." Carol's voice broke. "You promised." Carol continued sobbing, reaching out a trembling hand to her husband, who remained motionless in his dress uniform, decorated with medals. The yellow and blue flag of Ukraine next to the red, white, and blue flag of the United States, both draped over the polished, gleaming dark walnut coffin in which Ted Bruce lay. A father, soldier, husband.